They say a man's home is his castle, but nobody prepared me for the day my own kids would stage a coup. I'm sitting here on the front porch of the house I built with my bare hands 43 years ago, watching the morning sun paint the maple tree Martha and I planted when Tommy was born. The same tree that's now blocking the for sale sign my son wants to put up. The same tree where I buried our dog Rex, where the grandkids built their fort, where Martha took her last walk before the cancer took her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how this all started. Because if you're going to understand why I'm fighting this battle at 72 years old, you need to know who I am and what this place means. My name is Frank Sullivan, and I've been defending things my whole life. First, it was our neighborhood in Detroit when I was a kid, throwing punches at bullies twice my size. Then it was my platoon in the jungles of Vietnam where I learned that sometimes you fight not because you want to, but because everything you love is behind you and there's nowhere left to run. Now it's this house, this home, this promise I made to a dying woman that I'd keep our family together no matter what. 3 weeks ago, my oldest boy, Michael, 45 years old and still can't look me in the eye when he lies, sat me down at my own kitchen table and said, "Dad, it's time you moved out. This is our house now. Our house." Like he laid a single brick. Like he bled into the foundation or spent sleepless nights figuring out how to afford the mortgage when the factory laid me off in '84. I looked around that kitchen, at the cabinets I built by hand, at the window Martha picked out because it caught the morning light just right, at the table where we celebrated every birthday, every Christmas, every small victory, and weathered every storm. "Son," I said, keeping my voice steady the way Sergeant Mitchell taught me in basic training, "you seem to have forgotten who built this home and what I once survived to protect it. But they forgot, all right. They forgot everything. See, I wasn't always the old man who forgets where he put his reading glasses. I wasn't always the guy who needs help reaching things on high shelves or who takes too long to answer the door. Time has a way of making people see you different, making your own flesh and blood look at you like you're some burden they inherited instead of the man who gave them everything they have. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. Hamtramck, Michigan, 1952. I was 8 years old, and my old man worked the line at the Ford plant. Every morning at 5 a.m. sharp, I'd hear his work boots on the wooden floor, the smell of coffee and cigarettes, the sound of his lunch pail snapping shut. He was a man of few words but strong hands, and he taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by what he says, but by what he builds and what he's willing to defend. "Frankie," he'd say, showing me how to hold a hammer, how to read a level, how to make something that would last. A man who can't build something with his hands ain't much of a man at all, and a man who won't fight for what he built is worse than worthless. I learned those lessons well, maybe too well. When Bobby Kowalski and his gang cornered me behind the school in 5th grade, calling my old man a dumb Polak and my mother a name I won't repeat, I didn't run. I fought. Came home with a black eye and a suspension, but also with something more important, respect. My father took one look at my face and nodded. "You hurt?" he asked. "No, sir." "The other boys?" "They'll think twice next time." He handed me an ice pack and went back to his newspaper. That was all the conversation we needed. The neighborhood was changing in those days. White families moving out to the suburbs, new families moving in, tensions running high. But our block was different. We looked out for each other. Mrs. Kowalski next door would bring us pierogi when my mother was sick. Mr. Williams across the street would shovel our walk when my father pulled double shifts. And when trouble came, and it always came, we stood together. I remember the night 3 men tried to break into the Williamses' house. It was 1965. I was 21, just back from basic training, muscles hard as iron, and ready to take on the world. I heard the commotion from our front porch where I was having a beer with my father, watching the Tigers game on our transistor radio. Glass breaking, Mrs. Williams screaming, Mr. Williams shouting for them to get out. My father was already reaching for his coat, but I was faster. "Stay here, Pop," I said, and I was across the street before he could argue. The front door was hanging open, and I could see shadows moving inside, voices raised in anger and fear. I didn't think. Thinking gets you killed in situations like that. I just moved. The first guy was coming down the stairs with Mrs. Williams' jewelry box when I hit him. He went down hard, jewelry scattering across the hardwood floor like confetti. The second guy came at me with a knife. But 3 months of Army training had taught me things they don't teach you in Hamtramck. I disarmed him and put him on the ground so fast he didn't know what hit him. The third guy was holding Mr. Williams at gunpoint in the kitchen, demanding to know where they kept their money. He was young, nervous, sweating despite the cool evening. Dangerous because he was scared. "Let him go," I said, stepping into the doorway. The kid swung the gun toward me, his hand shaking. "Get back, man! I'll shoot!" "I swear I'll shoot." I looked into his eyes and saw what I'd learned to recognize in basic training, someone who was more afraid than angry. The ones who are angry, they're predictable. The scared ones, they might do anything. "You don't want to do this," I said, taking a slow step forward. "You came here for money, not to hurt anybody. Mr. Williams here is a good man. Worked 30 years at the plant, raised 4 kids, never hurt anybody in his life. You really want to destroy your life and his over what, maybe $50 in his wallet? Shut up, just shut up." But his hand was shaking worse now. "What's your name, son?" I said, "Shut up." "My name's Frank. I just got back from the Army, and let me tell you something I learned over there. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is walk away. Sometimes knowing when not to fight is what separates the smart ones from the dead ones." We stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds. The gun wavering between me and Mr. Williams, sirens wailing in the distance. My father had called the police the moment I ran across the street. Finally, the kid lowered the weapon. I didn't mean... I just needed... "I know," I said, stepping forward and gently taking the gun from his hand. "We all need sometimes. But this ain't the way." The police took all 3 of them away. Mr. Williams shook my hand, and Mrs. Williams hugged me tight, tears in her eyes. But what I remember most is my father's face when I came back across the street. Pride. Not the kind you get from winning a trophy or getting a promotion, but the kind you get from doing what's right when it would have been easier to look the other way. "You did good, Frankie," he said. And those 4 words meant more to me than any medal the Army ever gave me. That's the kind of man I was raised to be. The kind of man I tried to raise my own kids to be. So you can imagine how I felt sitting at my kitchen table 3 weeks ago. listening to my own son tell me I'm not capable of taking care of myself anymore, that I'm a liability, that it's time for assisted living. Assisted living. Like I'm some broken-down machine that needs assistance to function. Like I haven't been taking care of myself and everyone else for 7 decades. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. You need to understand how I got from that young man protecting his neighbors to the old fool whose own family wants to warehouse him. You need to understand about Vietnam, about Martha, about this house, and what it cost me to build it. The letter came in February 1966. Uncle Sam wanted me for a little vacation in Southeast Asia. I was 22, working construction with my father, saving money for a ring for Martha O'Brien, the prettiest girl in all of Hamtramck. We'd been dating since high school, and I had it all planned out. Marry her in the spring, buy a little house in the suburbs, raise a family, live the American dream. Instead, I got a one-way ticket to hell. I remember my last night at home. Martha and I sat on her parents' front porch, not saying much, just holding hands and watching the stars. She was trying not to cry, and I was trying to pretend I wasn't scared. "Promise me you'll come back," she whispered. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," I said, and I meant it. "I'm going to come back, marry you in that white dress you've been looking at in the window at Morrison's, and we're going to build a house so beautiful it'll make all the neighbors jealous." She laughed despite her tears. "Just come back, Frank Sullivan. Everything else is just details." I shipped out 3 days later. Basic training at Fort Benning was a wake-up call. I thought I was tough because I could handle myself in a street fight. But the Army had other ideas. They broke us down to nothing and built us back up into something else entirely. Something harder, something that could function when everything went to hell, and the only thing standing between you and death was your training and the man next to you. My drill sergeant was a wiry black man from Alabama named Mitchell, who'd already done 2 tours in Vietnam. He had eyes that had seen too much and a voice that could cut through chaos like a knife. "Listen up, you sorry excuses for soldiers," he'd bark at us during those endless hours of drill and training. "Over there, your best friend ain't your rifle, or your training, or your God. It's the man standing next to you. You let him down, you might as well put a bullet in his head yourself. You understand me?" We understood. I arrived in country in October 1966, assigned to the 1st Infantry Division, operating in the jungles northwest of Saigon. If you've never been in a jungle, you can't imagine what it's like. The heat hits you like a physical weight, pressing down on your shoulders, making every breath an effort. The humidity soaks through everything, your clothes, your skin, your soul. And the sounds, the constant buzz of insects, the calls of birds that sound like nothing you've ever heard, the rustle of things moving through the undergrowth that might be wind or might be Charlie waiting to put a bullet in your brain. My first patrol was with a squad led by Sergeant Tony Ricci, an Italian kid from Boston who'd been in country for 8 months and had the 1,000-yard stare that comes from seeing too much death too young. We were checking a village that intelligence said was being used as a supply route for the Viet Cong. "Stay alert, stay alive," Ricci told us as we moved through the rice paddies toward the village. "Charlie's everywhere and nowhere. You relax for 1 second, you're going home in a box." The village looked peaceful enough. Thatched huts, old women grinding rice, children playing in the dirt. But there was something wrong with the picture. No young men, no one making eye contact. Even the dogs seemed nervous. We were halfway through our sweep when the shooting started. I'd been in fights before, but nothing prepares you for combat. The crack of AK-47s from the tree line, the whine of bullets passing inches from your head, the screams of wounded men, the smell of cordite and blood and fear. Time moves different in a firefight. Seconds stretch into hours, and hours compress into heartbeats. I found myself pressed against the wall of a hut, returning fire at muzzle flashes in the jungle, my training taking over while my mind struggled to process what was happening. To my left, Rodriguez from El Paso was calling for a medic, blood running down his face from shrapnel. To my right, Williams from Detroit, same name as my old neighbor but no relation, was methodically working his way through a clip, his face calm as a man mowing his lawn. "Sullivan," Ricci's voice cut through the chaos. "We got wounded. I need you to get Patterson back to the LZ." Patterson was our radio man, a quiet kid from Iowa who talked about his girl back home and his plans to be a teacher. He'd taken a round through the shoulder and was losing blood fast, his face gray with shock. "I can't leave you guys," I shouted back. "That's an order, soldier. Get him out of here." So I did. I slung Patterson over my shoulder, all 180 pounds of him, and started the half-mile trek back to our landing zone through jungle that might be crawling with enemy soldiers. Every shadow could be death. Every sound could be the last thing I'd ever hear. But I kept moving, step after step, because that's what you do. You don't leave anybody behind. Patterson died in my arms 50 yards from the LZ. Just quietly stopped breathing, stopped bleeding, stopped being. One moment he was telling me about his girl Sarah and how he was going to ask her to marry him when he got home. And the next moment he was gone. 19 years old, and his war was over. I sat there in the dirt for a long time, holding this kid I barely knew, thinking about his girl Sarah who would never get that proposal, about his parents who would get a flag and a telegram instead of their son. And I made a promise to myself and to him and to every man I'd served with. If I made it home, I was going to live. Really live. Not just exist, but build something, create something, love something worth dying for. That was my first day in Vietnam. I had 364 more to go. The months that followed were a blur of patrols and firefights, of friends made and lost, of small victories and large defeats. We fought in jungles and rice paddies, in villages and on hilltops, against an enemy that seemed to melt away just when you thought you had them cornered. We lost good men to bullets and booby traps, to disease and despair, to the simple grinding horror of a war that none of us fully understood, but all of us had to fight. But we also found things in that green hell: brotherhood, courage, the knowledge that when everything else falls away, rank, race, religion, politics, what matters is whether you'll stand up when someone needs you to stand up, whether you'll do the right thing when the right thing might cost you everything. I learned that lesson for real on a patrol in March 1967. We were sweeping a valley that intelligence said was clear. But intelligence was wrong more often than it was right. Charlie had set up an ambush in a tree line overlooking a stream, and we walked right into it. The first burst of machine gun fire cut down 3 men before we could even hit the ground. The rest of us scrambled for cover behind a fallen log, but we were pinned down good. Every time one of us tried to move, the sniper in the trees would put a round so close you could feel the wind from it. Ricci was dead. The first burst had nearly cut him in half. Williams was wounded and unconscious. The new lieutenant, a college boy named Henderson, who'd been in country all of 2 weeks, was paralyzed with fear, curled up behind the log like a child, and that's when I saw him. Jenkins, our medic, was trapped in the open, maybe 30 yards away, trying to crawl to cover with a shattered leg. Every few seconds, the sniper would put a round in the dirt near him, not trying to kill him, but making sure he couldn't move, using him as bait. I could have stayed put. Should have stayed put. We all should have waited for air support or artillery or somebody with more rank to tell us what to do. But Jenkins was crying for his mother, and the sniper was taking his time, playing with him, and I couldn't just watch. "Cover me," I told what was left of my squad, and before anyone could argue, I was moving. I don't remember much about the next few minutes, just running and diving and rolling, muzzle flashes in the trees, the crack of bullets passing too close, the sound of my own breathing harsh and desperate in my ears. Somehow I reached Jenkins, got him over my shoulder, and started back toward the fallen log. That's when the sniper found his range. The bullet hit me in the left shoulder, spinning me around and sending both Jenkins and me tumbling into a shell crater. I could feel the warm wetness spreading down my arm, the grinding pain that meant something important was broken. But I was alive, and so was Jenkins, and that was what mattered. We lay there in that crater for what felt like hours, taking turns keeping pressure on each other's wounds, listening to the sporadic gunfire as the rest of our squad tried to keep the enemy busy. Jenkins was in and out of consciousness, muttering about his girl back in Memphis, about the kids they were going to have, about the house they were going to buy. "You're going to make it, Doc," I kept telling him. "We're both going to make it." And we did. Air support finally arrived and lit up that tree line like the 4th of July. The sniper and his friends were either dead or long gone, and the medics got us back to base camp and eventually to a real hospital. I spent 6 weeks in a hospital in Japan getting my shoulder put back together. 6 weeks of surgery and physical therapy, and letters from Martha telling me about her job at the diner, about the money she was saving for our wedding, about how proud she was of me. I wrote her every day long letters about everything except the war, about our plans for the future, about the house we were going to build and the children we were going to raise. When I was cleared for duty, they offered me a choice, another tour in Vietnam or a posting stateside. I chose to go home. I'd done my duty, saved who I could save, and lost enough pieces of myself to last a lifetime. It was time to start building something instead of just destroying. I landed at Detroit Metro on a gray morning in September 1967, wearing a uniform that felt strange after months of jungle fatigues, carrying a duffel bag and a Purple Heart and wounds that were deeper than the one in my shoulder. Martha was waiting for me at the gate, beautiful in a yellow dress I'd never seen before, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome home, soldier," she whispered as she kissed me. And for the first time in almost 2 years, I felt like I might actually make it home after all. But home was different now. The neighborhood had changed while I was gone. More families had moved out. More windows were boarded up. More streets felt dangerous after dark. The guys I'd grown up with looked at me differently now, like I'd been somewhere they couldn't imagine and seen things they didn't want to know about. Even my father, proud as he was, seemed to struggle with what to say to a son who'd been to war. And I was different too. Jumpier. More aware of exits and shadows and the way people moved. I'd wake up at night reaching for a rifle that wasn't there, listening for sounds that belonged to a jungle 10,000 miles away. The doctors had a name for it. They called it combat fatigue. But naming it didn't make it go away. Martha saw it all and loved me anyway. She'd hold me when the nightmares came, talk me down when loud noises made me hit the deck, wait patiently while I checked and rechecked the locks on our apartment door. She never asked me to talk about Vietnam, never pushed for details I wasn't ready to give. She just loved me and waited for me to find my way back to the man I'd been before the war. We were married in October 1968 in a small ceremony at St. Stanislaus with just our families and a few close friends. I wore my dress uniform with the Purple Heart on my chest, and Martha wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit her perfectly. When Father Kowalski pronounced us man and wife, I kissed her and thought about Patterson and Jenkins and all the men who would never have their wedding day. And I promised myself I would live well enough for all of us. Our honeymoon was 3 days in a cabin up near Traverse City, where the leaves were turning colors that reminded me of home instead of jungle camouflage. We spent hours just talking, really talking, about our dreams and fears and plans for the future. I told her about the house I wanted to build, every detail I'd imagined during those long nights on patrol. It has to be strong, I said, holding her close as we watched the sunset over the lake. Built to last. Something that could shelter our children and their children. Tell me about it, she said. So I did. I told her about the foundation I'd pour myself, deep and solid, anchored to bedrock. About the frame I'd build from good Michigan timber, joined with craftsmanship that would outlast us both. About the kitchen where she'd cook Sunday dinners for our family. The living room where we'd read bedtime stories to our children. The porch where we'd grow old together watching grandchildren play in the yard. It sounds perfect, she said. Where are we going to build this dream house? I've been looking at some land out in Warren, I said. It's not much now. Just an old farm that's been subdivided, but it's got good soil and big trees and room for kids to run. And it's far enough from the city that it feels safe, but close enough that I can still find work. We spent the next 2 years saving every penny we could, living in a cramped apartment above the diner where Martha worked, eating beans and rice more nights than I care to remember, but never complaining because we had a dream and we had each other, and that was enough. I found work with a construction company run by a Korean War veteran named Bob Harrison, who understood what it was like to come home from a war and try to build a normal life. The work was hard but satisfying, real construction, not the makeshift stuff we'd thrown together in the jungle, houses and schools and office buildings that were meant to last, built by men who took pride in their craftsmanship. Bob taught me things my father hadn't had time to show me, how to read blueprints, how to manage a crew, how to solve problems with your brain instead of just your hands. More importantly, he taught me that being a veteran didn't make me broken. It made me valuable. I'd learned to work under pressure, to lead men in difficult situations, to stay calm when everything was falling apart. Those were skills that translated well to civilian life, if you could find someone who recognized their value. By 1970, we had enough saved for the down payment on 3 acres of land in Warren, Michigan. It was everything I dreamed of: mature oak trees, gentle slopes, good drainage, far enough from the neighbors to have privacy, but close enough to be part of a community. The day we signed the papers, Martha and I walked every inch of that property, planning where the house would sit, where we'd plant a garden, where our children would build forts and climb trees and learn the same lessons about hard work and integrity that my father had taught me. "This is it," I said, putting my arm around her as we stood on the spot where I planned to pour the foundation. "This is where we build our life." Building that house was like fighting a war in reverse. Instead of destroying things, I was creating something. Instead of taking lives, I was building a place where life could flourish. Every nail I drove, every board I cut, every pipe I laid was an act of faith in the future, a belief that the world could be better than what I'd seen in the jungle. I did most of the work myself, partly to save money, but mostly because I needed to. I needed to know that every joint was true, every connection was solid, every detail was done right. Bob let me borrow tools and gave me advice, and my father came out on weekends to help with the heavy lifting. But the soul of that house was built with my own hands. The foundation took all summer. I dug that basement by hand, renting a small backhoe, only for the roughest excavation. Every shovelful of dirt was a meditation on permanence, on roots, on the difference between the temporary structures we'd built in Vietnam and the lasting home I was creating for my family. I mixed the concrete myself, one wheelbarrow at a time, laying rebar and forms with the precision of a man who understood that what he was building had to last forever. The framing went up in the fall, and that's when the house started to feel real. Martha would come out after work, still wearing her waitress uniform, and we'd walk through the skeleton of our future, planning where the furniture would go, where we'd hang pictures, where we'd put the Christmas tree. She was 3 months pregnant with Michael by then, just starting to show, and I'd watch her hand rest on her belly as she imagined our child's first steps across these floors I was building. Winter slowed the work, but didn't stop it. I'd be out there in snow and freezing rain, working by floodlight after my day job, installing insulation and running electrical wire and fitting plumbing. My hands were torn up from the cold and the work. My back ached from carrying lumber and drywall. But I'd never been happier. Every blister was an investment in our future. Every aching muscle was proof that I was building something that mattered. Martha would bring me coffee and sandwiches, and we'd sit on sawhorses in what would become our kitchen, planning our life in this house. We talked about the children we'd raise here, the holidays we'd celebrate, the memories we'd make. I told her about the workshop I was planning in the basement, where I'd teach our sons to use tools and build things with their hands. She talked about the garden she wanted to plant, the herbs and vegetables she'd grow to feed our family. "What if we have daughters, too?" she asked one snowy evening as we sat planning our future. "Then I'll teach them to use tools, too," I said. "And you can teach them to garden. Any child of ours is going to know how to work with their hands, regardless of what's between their legs." She laughed at that, the sound echoing off the bare walls of our unfinished home. "You're going to be a good father, Frank Sullivan." "I'm going to try," I said, and I meant it. I was going to be the kind of father my kids could be proud of, the kind of man they'd want to become. Michael was born in March 1971 in the hospital in Royal Oak, while I was putting the finishing touches on the drywall in his nursery. Martha's labor lasted 18 hours, and I paced the hospital waiting room like a caged animal, drinking bad coffee and smoking cigarettes I didn't really want. When the doctor finally came out and told me I had a son, I broke down and cried like a baby myself, thinking about Patterson and Jenkins and all the men who would never hold their children. I held Michael for the first time in that hospital room. This tiny, perfect person who shared my DNA and my name, and I made him the same promise I'd made to Martha at our wedding. I was going to live well enough for all of us. I was going to build a life worthy of the sacrifice that had brought me home. We moved into the house when Michael was 6 months old, even though it wasn't completely finished. The kitchen was functional, but not beautiful. The basement was still unfinished, and half the rooms needed paint. But it was ours. Completely, totally ours. I carried Martha across the threshold like a proper bride, even though we'd been married for 3 years, and she carried Michael. And we stood in our living room and looked around at what we'd built together. "Welcome home, my loves," I said. And Martha started crying again. The next few years were the best of my life. I'd come home from work to find Martha in the garden, dirt under her fingernails and the sun in her hair, Michael toddling around the yard chasing butterflies or trying to eat flowers. I'd finish whatever project I was working on that day, building kitchen cabinets, installing light fixtures, laying tile in the bathroom. And then we'd all sit on the front porch and watch the sunset, planning tomorrow's work and next year's improvements. Sarah was born in 1973, a colicky baby who kept us up nights but made up for it with a smile that could light up a room. Thomas came along in 1975, quieter than his siblings, but with a curiosity that got him into everything. By then, the house was truly finished. Every room painted, every closet organized, every system working perfectly. It was exactly what I'd envisioned during those long nights in Vietnam, a place where children could grow up safe and loved and strong. I taught the kids to work with their hands the way my father had taught me. Michael could handle a hammer by age 5, Sarah could measure and cut boards by 7, and Thomas was reading blueprints by the time he was 10. We built tree houses and go-karts, repaired bicycles and assembled toys, fixed everything that broke and improved everything that worked. Martha would watch us from the kitchen window, shaking her head at the noise and mess, but smiling at the sight of her family working together. "You're raising little carpenters," she'd tease me. "I'm raising people who understand that anything worth having is worth working for," I'd correct her. "And that there's dignity in honest work, no matter what kind of work it is." The neighborhood grew up around us, young families moving out from the city, building houses on the lots around ours, creating a community of people who shared our values and our dreams. We had block parties and barbecues, helped each other with home improvements, and watched each other's kids. It was the kind of neighborhood where you never locked your doors, where children could ride their bikes until the streetlights came on without their parents worrying, where neighbors were family, and family was everything. I coached Little League and helped with school fundraisers, served on the PTA, and volunteered for community projects. Martha organized potluck dinners and baby showers, started a community garden and a book club, became the unofficial mayor of our little corner of suburban paradise. We were living the American dream, and we knew it. But dreams don't last forever. Sometimes they grow up and move away. Sometimes they die of cancer in a hospital bed, holding your hand and asking you to promise to keep the family together. Michael was the first to leave, heading off to college at Michigan State with plans to study business. He was smart, maybe too smart, more interested in making money than making things. I'd tried to teach him the value of honest work, but he was drawn to the abstract world of finance and investments, places where you could make a fortune without ever getting your hands dirty. There's more money in managing other people's work than doing work yourself, Dad, he told me the summer before his senior year of college, when I offered to teach him how to run a construction crew. Maybe so, I said, but there's more satisfaction in building something real. He didn't understand then, and I'm not sure he understands now. He graduated with honors, got a job with a big investment firm in Detroit, bought an expensive car and expensive clothes and an expensive apartment downtown. He'd visit on holidays and special occasions, but always with one eye on his phone, always ready to rush back to what he called real life. Sarah went a different direction, studying education at Eastern Michigan, becoming the kind of teacher who actually cared about her students. She was always my soft-hearted one, more likely to cry over a dead bird than her brothers were to cry over a skinned knee. She married a decent man named David, who taught high school history and coached basketball, and they bought a small house 2 towns over where they raised 3 beautiful children who called me Grandpa and meant it. Thomas was the artist of the family, the dreamer who saw possibilities where other people saw problems. He studied architecture at University of Michigan, and for a while I thought he'd carry on the family tradition of building things. But he was drawn to the theoretical side of construction, more interested in designing buildings than actually constructing them. He moved to Chicago after graduation, working for a firm that specialized in commercial projects, visiting when he could, but always seeming like a stranger in the house where he'd grown up. Martha held us all together through those years of change and growth. She was the heart of our home, the center that everything else revolved around. She remembered everyone's birthday and anniversary, organized holiday gatherings that brought the whole extended family together, kept track of grandchildren's school events and sports games and music recitals. She was the one who made sure we stayed a family, even as we scattered across the state and beyond. So when the doctor told us she had ovarian cancer, stage 4, inoperable, maybe 6 months if we were lucky, it felt like the world was ending. Martha took the news better than I did. She held my hand in that sterile doctor's office and said, "Well, we knew this day would come eventually. The question is what we do with the time we have left." We did everything. Traveled to places we'd always talked about visiting. Spent long hours with the grandchildren, teaching them to cook her recipes and telling them stories about their parents when they were young. Organized family photos and wrote letters to be opened on future birthdays and anniversaries. Made sure every detail was planned for a life that would continue without her. But mostly, we sat on that front porch and watched the sun set behind the maple tree we'd planted when Michael was born, holding hands and talking about the life we'd built together. "Promise me something, Frank," she said one evening near the end, when the cancer had stolen her appetite and her strength, but not her spirit. "Anything?" Promise me you'll keep this house. No matter what the kids say, no matter how hard it gets. Promise me you'll keep our home together. This is where our love lives. This is where our family began. Don't let them turn it into just another real estate transaction. I promised her, and I meant it. 3 days later, she died in our bedroom, in the bed I'd built with my own hands, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and 47 years of love. The funeral was everything Martha would have wanted. Simple, dignified, full of family and friends and stories about a life well lived. People talked about her kindness and her strength, her devotion to family and community, her ability to make everyone feel welcome in our home. I sat in the front pew of St. Stanislaus, the same church where we'd been married, and listened to people describe the woman I'd loved my entire adult life. But funerals end, and grief doesn't. The house felt impossibly empty without Martha's voice, without her laughter, without the sound of her moving through rooms that suddenly seemed too big and too quiet. I'd catch myself setting 2 places at the table, or waiting for her to come home from errands. She'd never run again. Or reaching for her hand in the middle of the night, only to find empty space. The kids were wonderful at first. They took turns staying with me, helping me sort through Martha's things, making sure I was eating and sleeping and not drinking too much. Sarah would bring the grandchildren over on weekends, and their noise and energy would fill the house with something approaching life again. Michael would call every few days to check on me, offering to help with finances or household management. Thomas sent flowers and cards and promised to visit as soon as his work schedule allowed, but gradually, as the months passed, their attention shifted back to their own lives. The phone calls became less frequent, the visits shorter, the offers of help more perfunctory. I understood they had jobs and families and responsibilities of their own. I didn't expect them to put their lives on hold indefinitely for their grieving father. What I didn't expect was for them to start treating me like I was the problem. It started small. Comments about how I was letting the house go, how the yard needed work, how I seemed to be struggling with basic maintenance. Michael would walk through the house during his visits, making notes on his phone about repairs that needed to be done, improvements that should be made, the general deterioration of the property. "Dad, when's the last time you had the furnace serviced?" he'd ask, or, "This carpet really needs to be replaced," or, "The roof is starting to show its age." I'd explain that I was keeping up with everything just fine, that the house was in better shape than most homes half its age, that I'd built it to last and maintained it properly for 43 years. But he'd just shake his head and make more notes on his phone. Sarah was gentler, but no less persistent. She'd worry about me living alone, about what would happen if I fell or had a heart attack or just got too old to take care of myself. "We just want what's best for you, Dad," she'd say. But her version of what was best seemed to involve me giving up my independence and moving into some kind of managed care facility. Thomas was the worst, though he probably meant well. He'd visit with plans and estimates for updating the house, turning it into something more modern and marketable. He wanted to tear out the kitchen I'd built by hand and replace it with stainless steel and granite countertops. He wanted to install central air conditioning and knock out walls to create better flow and more open space. "Dad, I know this house has sentimental value," he'd say, "but from a design perspective, it's really dated. If you want to maximize your investment, we need to modernize investment. Like our home was just another financial asset to be optimized and eventually liquidated. I tried to be patient. I tried to remember that they were worried about me, that they loved me and wanted me to be safe and happy. But their love felt like suffocation, their concern like condescension. They talked about me like I wasn't in the room, made plans for my future without consulting me, treated me like a child who couldn't be trusted to make his own decisions. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago, at what Michael called a family meeting. He'd driven up from Detroit with a folder full of documents and a PowerPoint presentation on his laptop. Sarah had arranged for a babysitter so she could attend without distractions. Thomas had flown in from Chicago, his first visit in 8 months. They sat me down at my own kitchen table, the table where Martha had fed our family for 40 years, where we'd helped kids with homework and celebrated birthdays and planned vacations, and told me they'd been talking. "Dad," Michael began, his voice taking on the tone he probably used with difficult clients, "we're concerned about your living situation. This house is too big for one person, too expensive to maintain, and frankly, too isolated. If something happened to you, it could be hours before anyone found you. We've been researching assisted living facilities," Sarah added, sliding a brochure across the table. "There are some really nice places, Dad. Communities where you'd have people your own age, activities, medical care on site. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." I looked at the brochure. Sunny Meadows Senior Living Community. Pictures of old people playing shuffleboard and eating institutional food, and sitting in circles pretending to enjoy activities designed to keep them busy until they died. It looked like a prison with better landscaping. "What about the house?" I asked. Thomas leaned forward, excited to finally get to his part of the presentation. "That's the beautiful thing, Dad. The real estate market is really strong right now. We've had the house appraised, and we could easily get $700,000, maybe more if we do some strategic updates first. That money, properly invested, would more than cover your assisted living costs for the rest of your life, with plenty left over for the family." The family. Not me. The family. "Let me get this straight," I said, keeping my voice level the way Sergeant Mitchell had taught me 50 years ago. "You want me to sell the house I built with my own hands, the house where I raised you, the house where your mother died, so I can go live in some warehouse for old people, while you divide up the money?" "Dad, it's not like that," Sarah protested. "We just want what's best for you. And what's best for you, too, apparently." Michael's jaw tightened. "That's not fair. This isn't about money. It's about your safety and your quality of life. You're 72 years old, Dad. You can't maintain a house this size anymore. You forget things. You move slower. Last month, Mrs. Patterson found you in the yard at midnight, confused about where you were." That was true, but not the whole truth. I had been sleepwalking, something that had started after Martha died, and I'd woken up in the garden where she used to grow her tomatoes. I was confused for maybe 30 seconds before I remembered where I was and went back inside. Mrs. Patterson, bless her heart, had seen me through her window and come out to check on me, but by the time she reached me, I was already heading back to the house. "I had one episode of sleepwalking," I said. "That hardly makes me incompetent." "It's not just that," Thomas said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through what looked like a list. The gutters need cleaning. The driveway needs resealing. The basement stairs are getting dangerous. The electrical system should be updated. This house is becoming a liability. I've maintained this house for 43 years, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I built most of it with my own hands. I think I know what it needs and when it needs it. Dad, Michael said, using that same patronizing tone. We're not questioning your abilities. We're just saying that maybe it's time to let someone else take care of the details while you focus on enjoying your retirement. Enjoying my retirement. In a place where someone else would make my meals and clean my room and decide when I could have visitors and what activities I was allowed to participate in. Where I'd be surrounded by strangers instead of memories. Where I'd sleep in a bed someone else had chosen in a room that belonged to an institution instead of to me. This is my home, I said. Your mother and I built this life together. She's buried in the cemetery 5 miles from here. Her garden is in the backyard. Her recipes are in the kitchen. Her spirit is in every room. You're asking me to abandon everything that matters to me so you don't have to worry about getting a phone call some night. Dad, Sarah said gently, Mom is gone. Keeping the house won't bring her back. That's when something inside me snapped. Not anger exactly, but something harder and colder and more final. Get out, I said. They looked at each other, confused. Dad? I said, get out. This is my house, and these are my decisions to make, and I've heard enough. Get out. Dad, please, Sarah started, but I cut her off. Out. Now, before I say something we'll all regret. They left, but not before Michael turned back at the door and said, Dad, we're just trying to help. Whether you believe it or not, we love you. Then prove it, I said. Leave me alone. That was 3 weeks ago, and I haven't heard from any of them since. No phone calls, no visits, no checking to see if the crazy old man has fallen down the stairs or wandered off into the woods. I guess they figure, if I want to be stubborn and independent, I can deal with the consequences myself. But here's what they don't understand, what they've never understood. This house isn't just where I live. It's who I am. Every board and nail and coat of paint represents something I've learned, something I've built, something I've protected. This is where I brought my bride, where I raised my children, where I buried my dog and celebrated my grandchildren's births and held my wife's hand as she died. This house is the physical manifestation of every promise I've ever kept, every battle I've ever fought, every reason I had for coming home from Vietnam. It's proof that a man can build something lasting with his hands and his heart, that love and work and time can create something more valuable than money, and they want me to sell it so they can put me in a home and split the proceeds. Well, I've got news for them. This war isn't over. I may be 72 years old, but I'm the same man who carried Patterson through the jungle, who disarmed a gunman in my neighbor's kitchen, who built this house board by board and nail by nail. I've been defending things my whole life, and I'm not about to stop now. So yesterday, I did what any good soldier does when he's facing a superior force with better resources and questionable motives. I made a plan. First, I called my lawyer, Bill Morrison, whose father had served in Korea and who understood what promises meant. Bill had handled Martha's will and our estate planning, and he knew the legal ins and outs of everything related to the house. Frank, he said when I explained the situation, Your kids can't force you to sell or move unless they can prove you're mentally incompetent. And even then, they'd need to go through the courts. As long as you can demonstrate that you're capable of making your own decisions and taking care of yourself, this house is yours to do with as you please. What would they need to prove incompetence? Medical evidence primarily. A doctor would need to testify that you're unable to understand the consequences of your decisions or care for yourself safely. It's not easy to prove, and it's not something they can just claim because they're worried about you. That was good to know, but I wanted more than just defensive measures. I wanted to make sure my position was unassailable. Bill, I want to update my will. I want it to be crystal clear that this house stays in the family, but only on my terms. And I want to make sure that if anything happens to me, there are specific instructions about who makes decisions about my care. We spent 2 hours going over the details. The house would remain in a trust with specific provisions about who could live there and under what circumstances. My medical power of attorney would go to Sarah, but only with strict limitations about what decisions she could make. And most importantly, there would be detailed instructions about my wishes regarding end-of-life care and assisted living. Specifically, that I would never be placed in any kind of institutional care against my will. Next, I called Dr. Harrison, my family physician for the past 15 years, and scheduled a complete physical and mental health evaluation. Frank, Dr. Harrison said after putting me through every test he could think of. For a man your age, you're in remarkable health. Your blood pressure is a little high, your joints are a little stiff, and you could stand to lose 10 pounds, but there's absolutely nothing here that would suggest you're unable to live independently or make your own decisions. Would you be willing to put that in writing? Absolutely. In fact, I'd recommend that any family members who are concerned about your competence spend some time with you and see for themselves how well you're managing. But I wasn't done yet. I'd learned in the Army that the best defense is a good offense, and I was tired of being defensive about my capabilities. I spent the next week making a list of everything my kids had complained about regarding the house, and then systematically addressing each item. The gutters got cleaned and repaired. The driveway got resealed. The basement stairs got new railings and better lighting. The electrical system got inspected and updated where necessary. I even had the roof professionally inspected and made the minor repairs the inspector recommended. But more than that, I started documenting everything. I took photos of every repair, kept receipts for every expense, maintained a detailed log of every maintenance task I performed. If my kids wanted to claim I couldn't take care of the house, I was going to have evidence to prove them wrong. I also reached out to my neighbors, the people who had watched me build this house and raise my family and take care of Martha through her illness. I explained what was happening and asked them to keep an eye on things, not because I needed help, but because I wanted witnesses to the fact that I was managing just fine on my own. Mrs. Pattison, now 85 and still sharp as a tack, was particularly indignant. "Those children of yours should be ashamed," she said. "You're one of the most capable men I know, and this house is a testament to what a man can accomplish when he puts his mind to it. If they can't see that, they're fools." Mr. Kowalski, whose own father had built their house 40 years ago, offered to help with any projects that required 2 people. My dad always said a man's home is his castle, he said. You got every right to defend yours. Even the younger families in the neighborhood, people who had moved in long after Martha and I were established, expressed their support. The Johnsons, who lived 2 houses down, stopped by to tell me how much they respected what I'd built and how sorry they were that my family didn't seem to appreciate it. Mr. Sullivan, Mrs. Johnson said, you and Mrs. Sullivan were part of what made us want to move to this neighborhood. This house, the way you've maintained it, the example you've set. It's an inspiration. I hope someday my husband and I can build something half as beautiful and lasting. Her words meant more to me than she probably realized. Here were people who understood what Martha and I had created, who saw the value in what we'd built not just as a financial investment, but as a home, a legacy, a symbol of what was possible when 2 people committed their lives to each other and to something larger than themselves. But I knew that emotional support, while gratifying, wouldn't be enough if my kids decided to escalate their campaign. I needed to be prepared for whatever they might try next. So I did something I hadn't done since Vietnam. I prepared for war. I researched elder law and learned about the tactics that adult children sometimes use to gain control over aging parents. I studied the legal requirements for proving incompetence and the steps necessary to force someone into care against their will. I learned about financial abuse and how families sometimes manipulate older relatives into giving up their assets. What I found made me angry, but not surprised. There are people who prey on elderly Americans, convincing them they're unable to care for themselves, pressuring them to give up their homes and their independence for the supposed benefit of the family. Sometimes those people are strangers. Sometimes they're family members who have convinced themselves they're acting out of love when they're really acting out of greed or convenience. I wasn't going to let that happen to me. I also started reaching out to other veterans, guys I'd served with, and guys I'd met through the VFW and American Legion. Many of them had faced similar situations with their families, and they shared their strategies for maintaining their independence and dignity as they aged. The key, said Jimmy Kowalski, who'd served in Korea and was now dealing with his own family's attempts to move him into assisted living, is to stay one step ahead of them. Don't let them control the narrative. Don't let them make you feel like you're the problem. You earn the right to live your life on your own terms. Tony Ricci, my old platoon sergeant from Vietnam who now lived in Florida, called me after hearing about my situation from another vet. Frank, he said, you remember what I taught you about fighting a superior force? You don't fight them where they're strong, I said. You fight them where they're weak. Exactly. Your kids think they know what's best for you because they're younger and they have college degrees and they make more money. But they don't know what it means to build something with your hands. They don't understand the value of what you've created. That's their weakness. He was right. My kids saw the house as a burden, an asset to be managed, a problem to be solved. They didn't see it as the foundation of our family, the physical embodiment of the love Martha and I had shared, the legacy I wanted to leave to future generations. That was their weakness, and it was my strength. So I started planning my counterattack. The first step was to invite them back, not to negotiate or compromise, but to educate them about what they were asking me to give up. I called each of them and asked them to come for dinner on Sunday, like we used to do when Martha was alive. "Dad," Michael said, "I'm not sure that's a good idea. Our last conversation didn't end well." "Our last conversation ended exactly as it should have," I said. "But I've been thinking about what you said, and I think there are some things you need to understand about this house and about me. Give me one afternoon to explain my position, and then we can discuss your concerns." Sarah was more receptive. "I'd love to have dinner with you, Dad. I've missed our talks." Thomas was suspicious. "Dad, if this is just going to be another argument about assisted living, I'd rather skip it. I've got a lot of work to catch up on." "Son," I said, "I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to listen to me. After everything I've done for this family, I think I've earned that much." He agreed to come, though I could tell he wasn't happy about it. Sunday afternoon, they all showed up at the house they wanted me to sell. Michael brought his wife Jennifer, who had always been polite but distant. Sarah came alone. David was coaching a basketball tournament. Thomas looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I'd spent the morning cooking Martha's pot roast recipe, the one she'd made for special occasions and family gatherings. The smell filled the house with the memories of better times, when we were all together and happy and united in our love for each other. "Dad, the house smells amazing," Sarah said as they came in. "I haven't had your pot roast since your mother died," I finished. "I know. I thought it was time to remember some of the good things about this place." We sat down to dinner in the dining room, around the table Martha had picked out 30 years ago, under the chandelier I'd installed as a surprise for our 20th anniversary. I served the meal on the good china, the set Martha had inherited from her grandmother and saved for special occasions. "This is just like old times," Sarah said, and for a moment it was. We talked about work and weather and the grandchildren's activities, avoiding the elephant in the room while we enjoyed being together as a family. But eventually the conversation turned to what we were all thinking about. "Dad," Michael said, "this dinner is wonderful, and it's good to see you. But I hope you're not trying to use nostalgia to avoid having a serious conversation about your future." "Actually," I said, "I'm hoping to use facts to have a serious conversation about my present. There are some things you need to know about this house and about me that I don't think you understand." I stood up and walked to the sideboard where Martha had always kept our important papers. From the drawer, I pulled out a manila folder containing everything I'd prepared over the past 3 weeks. "First," I said, laying out the documents, "here's a complete physical and mental health evaluation from Dr. Harrison, dated last week. Blood work, stress test, cognitive assessment, the works. According to medical science, I'm in excellent health for a man my age and fully capable of living independently and making my own decisions." Michael picked up the papers and scanned them, his expression unreadable. "Second," I continued, "here's a detailed maintenance log for this house, going back 5 years. Every repair, every upgrade, every inspection, every expense. As you can see, this house is not falling apart or becoming a liability. It's in better condition than most houses half its age because I've maintained it properly." Thomas looked through the maintenance records, his architect's eye taking in the details. "Dad, this is impressive. I had no idea you were keeping such detailed records." "Third," I said, Here's a complete financial analysis of my situation. My pension, my Social Security, my savings, my investments, the value of this house. I'm not rich, but I'm financially secure. I can afford to maintain this house and take care of myself without burdening any of you. Sarah examined the financial documents. Dad, I never thought you were a burden. I just worried about you being alone if something happened. Which brings me to my fourth point, I said. Here's a list of my neighbors, their phone numbers, and their contact information. Mrs. Patterson checks on me every morning when she gets her paper. Mr. Kowalski and I have coffee twice a week. The Johnsons invited me to their Christmas party. I'm not isolated. I'm part of a community that values me and looks out for me. I sat back down and looked at each of them in turn. Now let me tell you some things that aren't in those documents. Things about what this house means and why I'll never give it up voluntarily. I told them about the night I decided to come home from Vietnam, sitting in that hospital in Japan and planning every detail of the house I was going to build. I told them about working construction all day and then coming home to work on our house by floodlight, mixing concrete by hand and carrying lumber upstairs that didn't have railings yet. I told them about the first night we spent in this house, sleeping on a mattress on the floor because we didn't have any furniture yet, listening to the sounds of our new home settling around us. About the morning I taught Michael to hold a hammer, and the afternoon I showed Sarah how to measure twice and cut once, and the evening I explained to Thomas why a house needs to be level and square and true. I told them about Martha's garden, how we'd planned it together and planted it together and watched it grow year after year, how she'd can vegetables from that garden and serve them at Thanksgiving dinner, how she'd cut flowers for the dining room table and herbs for the kitchen. I told them about Christmas mornings in the living room, about birthday parties in the backyard, about family dinners around this table where we were sitting now, about homework sessions and art projects and science experiments, about bedtime stories and goodnight kisses and all the ordinary moments that make a house into a home. I told them about the night Martha died, how she'd asked me to promise to keep this house in the family, how she'd made me swear that I wouldn't let it become just another real estate transaction. This house, I said, is not just where I live. It's the physical embodiment of every choice your mother and I made, every sacrifice we accepted, every dream we pursued. It's the foundation of our family, literally and figuratively. It's where you learn to walk and talk and think and dream. It's where your children come to visit their grandfather and hear stories about their grandmother. I paused, letting that sink in. When you ask me to sell this house and move into assisted living, you're not just asking me to change my address. You're asking me to abandon everything that gives my life meaning. You're asking me to break the last promise I made to your mother. You're asking me to pretend that none of this matters, that home is just a place to sleep and eat and wait to die. The room was quiet for a long moment. Sarah had tears in her eyes. Thomas was staring at his hands. Michael was looking around the dining room like he was seeing it for the first time. Dad, Sarah said finally, I never thought about it like that. I was just worried about your safety. I know, I said, and I appreciate your concern. But I need you to understand that safety isn't the most important thing in life. Dignity is, purpose is. The right to make your own choices, even if other people think they're wrong choices. Michael cleared his throat. Dad, what if something happens to you? What if you fall down the stairs or have a heart attack or... Then I die in the house I built, surrounded by the memories of the woman I loved and the family I raised. There are worse ways to go. That's not fair, Jennifer said, speaking up for the first time. You're asking us to worry about you every day, to wonder if the next phone call is going to be someone telling us you're hurt or dead. I looked at her, this woman who had married my son but never really understood our family. Jennifer, I spent 13 months in Vietnam, wondering every day if I was going to come home alive. Your husband's mother spent 47 years married to a man who worked construction, wondering every day if he was going to fall off a roof or get hit by a truck or have an accident with a power tool. Worry is part of love. If you're not willing to worry about the people you care about, maybe you don't care about them as much as you think you do. That was harsh, but it was true. Love without risk isn't love. It's just convenience. Thomas leaned forward. Dad, what if we could find a way to address our concerns without you having to leave the house? What if we could set up some kind of monitoring system or hire someone to check on you regularly, or you could trust me to know my own limitations and ask for help when I need it, I said. I'm not a child, Thomas. I'm not an invalid. I'm a 72-year-old man who happens to know how to take care of himself and his property. Michael was quiet for a while, thinking. Finally, he said, Dad, I owe you an apology. We came at this all wrong. We treated you like a problem to be solved instead of a person with his own thoughts and feelings. Apology accepted, I said. But more importantly, I need you to understand that this conversation is over. I'm not selling this house. I'm not moving into assisted living. I'm not giving up my independence or my dignity to make your lives easier. If that worries you, that's your problem to solve, not mine. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. Dad, what can we do to help? What would make you feel supported without making you feel controlled? That was the right question, the one I'd been hoping someone would ask. Visit me, I said. Not to check up on me or inspect the house or make lists of things that need to be done. Visit me because you want to spend time with your father. Call me to tell me about your lives, not to make sure I'm still breathing. Include me in family plans instead of making plans about me. I looked around the table at these 3 people I'd raised and loved and sometimes disappointed. Bring the grandchildren here, I continued. Let them play in the yard where you played. Teach them the stories I taught you. Show them the workshop where we built their toys and fixed their bicycles. Help them understand that this house is part of their heritage, part of who they are. And most importantly, I said, trust me. Trust that I know my own mind and my own capabilities. Trust that if I need help, I'll ask for it. Trust that the man who built this house and raised this family and survived everything life has thrown at him might just be capable of making his own decisions about how to live and where to die. We talked for another hour, working through the practical details of how we could stay connected without anyone feeling controlled or abandoned. It wasn't perfect. There were still underlying tensions and unresolved concerns. But it was honest. It was respectful. It was what families do when they love each other enough to have difficult conversations. As they were getting ready to leave, Thomas pulled me aside. Dad, he said, I want you to know that I understand now what you meant about building something that lasts. This house, it's not just a structure. It's a monument to everything you and Mom accomplished together. That's exactly what it is, I said. And monuments aren't meant to be torn down just because they're old. Michael was the last to leave. He stood in the doorway, looking back at the house he'd grown up in. "Dad," he said, "I still worry about you. I can't help it. But I promise I'll worry differently from now on. Less like a financial advisor and more like a son. That's all I ask," I said. After they left, I sat on the front porch and watched the sun set behind Martha's maple tree. The house felt peaceful again, settled, like a fort that had successfully withstood a siege. I thought about the promises I'd made to my wife, to my children, to myself, and I knew I'd kept them all. This war was over, but more importantly, this home was safe. A few days later, I got a call from Sarah. "Dad," she said, "I was talking to David about everything we discussed on Sunday, and he had an idea. What if we started having regular family dinners again, like we used to when Mom was alive?" "I'd like that," I said. "Martha always said the family that eats together stays together." "Maybe the grandchildren could help you with some of your projects," she continued. "Emma's getting old enough to learn how to use tools, and Jake is fascinated by how things work. It might be good for them to learn from their grandfather." "It would be my pleasure to teach them," I said, and I meant it. There's nothing I'd rather do than pass on the skills my father taught me, the lessons I'd learned in war and peace, the knowledge that comes from building something with your own hands. Michael called a few days after that. "Dad," he said, "I've been thinking about what you said about this house being a monument to you and Mom. I'd like to help you document some of the history. Maybe we could go through old photos and write down some of the stories about how you built it and what it meant to the family." "I'd love that," I said. "There are stories I haven't told in years, things your mother and I shared that the family should know." Even Thomas called, with an offer I hadn't expected. "Dad," he said, "I know I was wrong about updating the house. It's perfect the way it is. But if you ever want to make any improvements or modifications, I'd be honored to help design them. Maybe we could add a workshop for the grandchildren, or expand the garden, or build a deck where you could sit and watch the sunset." "Let me think about it," I said. "But I appreciate the offer. The truth is, I probably will take him up on it eventually. Not because the house needs improving, but because building something together might be a way for us to rebuild our relationship. Because the best way to understand what matters to someone is to work alongside them, to sweat with them, to solve problems with them. That's what I learned in Vietnam, in my neighborhood, in 43 years of marriage to Martha. The things that matter, love, family, home, honor, integrity, they're not abstract concepts. They're things you build with your hands and your heart, things you defend with your life if necessary, things you pass on to the next generation, not as words, but as examples. This house is my example. It's proof that a man can come home from war and build something beautiful, that two people can love each other enough to create a legacy that outlasts them both, that a family can weather any storm if they have a strong enough foundation. I'm 72 years old, and I've been defending things my whole life. I defended my friends in the neighborhood, my brothers in Vietnam, my family in this house. I defended the promise I made to Martha, the values my father taught me, the belief that what you build with love and sacrifice is worth fighting for. And I'll keep defending them until the day I die, which I hope will be many years from now, in the bedroom I built with my own hands, in the house that stands as a monument to everything I've ever believed in. Because a man's home is his castle, and this castle is mine.